My name is Clara Lynn. I'm 38 years old and I was 40 seconds from driving straight into a trap. It was a Thursday morning in late October. The sky over Portland, Maine, was the color of wet slate, and a steady drizzle had turned the parking lot into a mirror of brake lights and puddles. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the rain trace slow paths down the windshield. In the passenger seat lay a leather folio, thick with documents, sealed in plastic sleeves. In the back seat sat a wooden crate lined with foam, holding a brass regulator clock my father had spent 3 years restoring. And in 90 minutes, I was supposed to walk into a conference room on Congress Street and sign away the last thing he left behind. I pressed the unlock button. The side mirrors unfolded with a quiet mechanical click. I reached for the door handle. A man in a faded navy coat sprinted across the wet asphalt. He didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just grabbed the edge of my door before I could pull it open. His breath came fast, visible in the cold air. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were locked on mine. "Don't walk in blind," he said. Voice low, urgent, but not panicked. "They've set the room. The evaluator's already here. If you go in without knowing what's waiting, you lose everything. Not just the workshop. Your name, your standing, your father's legacy. Don't give them the chance to write it for you." I didn't move. I just watched him. Rain dripped from his coat onto the pavement. His shoes were worn at the heel. He looked like a man who had been walking for a long time. I didn't walk in blind. And what happened in that conference room would unravel 22 months of carefully constructed lies, dismantle a fraud built on digital timestamps and borrowed credentials, and quietly break the woman who thought she had already won. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share true-to-life narratives about family betrayal, hidden truths, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground when the people who should protect you choose to look away. Every story here is about dignity, boundaries, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. If this one resonates with you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My mother died when I was 24, pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, faster than the doctors expected, and by the time the pain became unmanageable, we were already past the point of hope. She fought for 9 months. She lost on a Tuesday afternoon in November while my father held her left hand and I held her right. The room smelled like antiseptic and dried lavender. The machines were quiet. My father didn't cry in front of the nurses. He didn't cry in front of me. He just pressed his forehead to her knuckles and stayed like that until the monitor flatlined. That was the last time I saw him break. Arthur Lynn was a horologist, not a watch repairman, not a clock seller, a horologist. He studied time the way some people study scripture. He understood the mathematics of gear ratios, the metallurgy of mainsprings, the acoustics of pendulum swings. He restored antique regulators, carriage clocks, and maritime chronometers. His workshop was a converted carriage house behind our family home, a space he built with his own hands over 12 years. Every shelf was leveled with a spirit level. Every tool hung on a pegboard arranged by function and frequency of use. The floor was swept clean of brass shavings and oil drips. He kept the temperature at exactly 68 degrees and the humidity at 45%. He said metal remembers, wood expands, time is patient but it punishes carelessness. He wore the same master chronometer on a leather strap every day. It wasn't flashy. Silver case, white enamel dial, blued steel hands. His grandfather had brought it from overseas in 1948, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside a suitcase. He never took it off, not when he ate, not when he worked, not even when he slept. He wound it every evening at 8 o'clock. He said it kept him honest. If you can't keep time, he told me once, you can't keep your word. For 14 years after my mother passed, it was just me and him. Sunday tea at 3. Ledger entries at 6. Phone calls every Wednesday at 7:45 because that's when his favorite radio program ended and the quiet began. I lived 20 minutes away in a small apartment above a bookshop. I worked as an archival conservator at the State Historical Society, repairing water-damaged manuscripts, stabilizing brittle paper, cataloging forgotten correspondence. I liked my job. It required patience, precision, and a willingness to sit with things that had been neglected. I understood my father's work because it was the same philosophy. Respect the original, restore what's broken. Don't rewrite history to make it easier to carry. Then Vivian Vance walked into his life. She showed up at the annual Maritime Antique Fair in October. She wore a cream linen dress, carried a woven tote, and asked him 3 questions about a 1920s regulator clock before asking his name. She said she was a wellness consultant. She said she helped people align their environments with their energy. She brought matcha lattes to his workshop. She complimented his pegboard. She smiled at everyone in the room except when she thought no one was looking. She smelled like jasmine and vetiver, thick and sweet, the kind of scent that lingers on upholstery long after someone has left. Within 3 months, my father was having dinner with her twice a week. Within 6, he introduced her to me as his partner. Within 9, they married at the county clerk's office with 2 witnesses and a notary. I didn't fight it. He was 59, he was lonely. And Vivian was attentive in ways I, working 55-hour weeks and managing a household of fragile paper, couldn't always be. But I noticed things. The way she redirected conversations away from finances. The way she praised his craftsmanship, but never asked how an escapement worked. The way she rearranged his workshop shelves to optimize flow without asking where anything belonged. The way she smiled at the neighbors but never remembered their names. My father died in his sleep on a Saturday morning in late August. Quietly, no struggle, just a heart that finally decided it had kept enough time. Vivian called 911 at 8:14 a.m. Paramedics arrived at 8:32. I arrived at 8:49. Vivian was already in the kitchen, dressed, hair brushed, makeup precise. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. She said she'd tried to wake him. She said he hadn't responded. She said she'd done everything she could. I believed her for a while. The funeral was small, 28 people, former clients, a few fellow horologists. 2 neighbors who brought soup. Vivian wore black. She cried into a linen handkerchief at the graveside. The timing was perfect. Not too early, not too late, just enough to show grief without breaking down. I stood beside her and said nothing. I held my father's chronometer in my pocket. It was still ticking. 2 weeks after we buried him, I got a phone call. Miss Lynn, my name is Richard Croft. I'm the attorney handling your father's estate. I sat up straight. My father's estate had always been managed by Unraveled Vance, a quiet, meticulous probate attorney who had handled our family's paperwork for 23 years. I'm sorry, I said. There must be a mistake. My father's attorney is Unraveled Vance. Croft cleared his throat. Your father transferred his legal affairs to my firm approximately 18 months ago. Mrs. Vance facilitated the transition. At his request, I wrote down his name. Croft and Linwood. There's a new will that needs to be reviewed, he said. I'd like to schedule a meeting at my office with all relevant parties. I hung up, sat in my kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed, the faucet dripped. My father never mentioned changing attorneys. Not once. He didn't even like email. He kept everything on paper. He said paper doesn't get hacked. Paper doesn't change overnight. Paper waits. 3 days later, I drove to the carriage house. The front gate had a new lock. I stood there with my old key in my hand, turning it, hearing it catch against something that didn't fit. I knocked. Vivian opened the door in a silk robe and slippers. Behind her, the workshop had been rearranged. My mother's drafting table was gone. Arthur's pegboard was half empty. The regulator clock he'd been restoring was nowhere to be seen. Clara, she said, I wasn't expecting you. I came to pick up some of Dad's things, I said. She tilted her head. This is my home now, sweetheart. Arthur and I discussed it. I'll send you anything that belongs to you. I stood on that porch for 10 seconds without speaking. Then I asked if I could at least check the storage shed. She waved her hand. Take whatever's in there. I have no use for old brass. The shed was a mess, tools shoved into plastic bins. My mother's old ledger box leaning against the wall with a crack down the spine. And in the corner, underneath a pile of canvas tarps, I found it. A wooden crate. 24 inches by 18, dovetail joints. My father had built it for his master chronometer. He carved a small compass rose into the lid. Inside, he kept his calibration tools, his handwritten maintenance logs, and a wax-sealed envelope he'd told me was for when the time is right. Vivian had thrown it out here with the sawdust and the broken shelves. I carried the crate to my car. It smelled like linseed oil and old paper. I didn't open it, not yet. The following week, Vivian invited the family to dinner. Not at a restaurant, at the carriage house. My father's table, my father's dishes. She called it a gathering to discuss Arthur's wishes. She said it like she was hosting a book club. 14 people showed up. My uncle David, my aunt Helen. 2 of my father's former apprentices. 3 neighbors. Unraveled Vance, who sat in the corner and said almost nothing. And Julian, Vivian's son from her first marriage, 31 years old, unemployed, wearing a new suit and sitting next to his mother like a bodyguard. Vivian stood at the head of the table. She had printed copies of something. I couldn't see what and placed them face down at each seat. Thank you all for coming, she said. Arthur was very clear about his wishes. The new will prepared by his attorney, Richard Croft, leaves the estate, the carriage house, the savings accounts, and the life insurance payout to me as his wife. She paused, looked at me. Clara will receive a separate bequest of $15,000. Arthur felt that was appropriate given your independent career. 15,000 out of 620,000. Uncle David shifted in his chair. Aunt Helen stared at the table. Nobody spoke. Julian leaned back and smiled. Dad wanted what was best, he said. Mom is what was best. I looked at Vivian's wrist. She was wearing my father's master chronometer. She had replaced the leather strap with a thin silver chain, wearing it like jewelry, like a trophy. My mother's husband's chronometer on the wrist of a woman who showed up fully dressed 40 minutes after his heart stopped. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I made the mistake of asking one question. When did my father sign this will? Vivian smiled, not the warm smile she used on everyone else. The other one. The one that said she had already counted the money. 18 months ago, she said, right after we aligned his priorities. His priorities, I repeated. She stepped closer. 14 people watched. And in a voice sweet enough to rot teeth, she said it. You were never his focus, Clara. He needed peace. He chose me. The room went silent, not uncomfortable silent, complicit silent. The kind of silence that tells you no one is coming to help. Uncle David looked at his hands. Aunt Helen sipped her water. One of the apprentices pulled out his phone. Eleanor Vance stared at Vivian with an expression I couldn't read. I picked up my purse. I pushed back my chair. I walked out of that house without saying a single word. Nobody followed me. I sat in my car for 15 minutes before I started the engine. The jasmine perfume was still in my nose. That thick, sweet, suffocating scent that Vivian carried everywhere like a warning label. 14 people in that room. Not one of them said a word. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I sat with it for a long time in my car, in the driveway of the carriage house my father built, wearing a dress I bought for the occasion because I thought this was going to be a conversation, not a sentencing. She told me I was never his priority in front of everyone, and everyone let her. That was the night I decided I was not going to cry about this anymore. I was going to find out the truth. I went home to my apartment, a one-bedroom above a bookshop on Commercial Street. Neat, quiet, the kind of place an archivist lives when she spends more time at work than anywhere else. I sat on my couch with a photo of my parents on my lap. Mom in her garden, Dad behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding his chronometer like he always did when he was proud of something. The numbers ran through my head because that's what I do. I'm an archival conservator. I work with paper, with dates, with provenance. Numbers and timelines are my language. The carriage house, 410,000 based on recent comps in the neighborhood. Savings and investment accounts, roughly 180,000. Life insurance, 90,000. Personal effects and tools, 40,000. Total estate, approximately 620,000. 30 years of Arthur Lynn showing up to the workshop at 5:30 in the morning. 30 years of overtime, custom commissions, birthday parties where he said, we don't need anything fancy, because he was putting every spare dollar into calibration equipment and climate control. And Vivian wanted all of it after 4 years of marriage. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the question I couldn't stop asking. Did he really change his mind? Did my father actually sit down and decide that his daughter of 38 years deserved $15,000 while a woman he'd known for 4 years got everything? Because if he did, then I didn't know my father at all. I looked at the photo again, his hand on my mother's shoulder, his eyes steady, certain, the way they always were. Either my father lied to me for 14 years or someone was lying. Now, I found Diane Rossi through a colleague at the Historical Society. Probate attorney. 16 years of experience. Office in a converted brownstone off Congress Street with framed certificates on every wall and a coffee mug that read, I object to mornings. She was direct, I liked that. I sat across from her desk and laid out everything. The dinner, the will, Vivian's declaration, the new attorney, the 15,000. Diane took notes. She asked about my father's health before he died. She asked about his relationship with Vivian. She asked when the will was supposedly signed. Then she leaned back and said, the will Croft produced looks valid on its face, but I have questions. Your father had an established attorney for 2 decades and switched without telling you. That's unusual. And digital notarization? In this state, that requires in-person verification unless there's an emergency provision, which there wasn't. She didn't even wait for the headstone, I said. She was rearranging shelves before the stone was placed. Diane wrote that down. We'd need to prove either undue influence or forgery. A forensic document examiner can analyze the signature, but I want to be honest with you, Clara. Contesting a will takes time and money, and Vivian will fight back. I know she has the advantage right now. She has the house. The will. The attorney who drafted it. I know that too, I said. Diane studied me for a moment. Most people who sit in that chair are angry. You seem calm. I thought about it. I'm not calm. I'm just very good at timelines. She almost smiled. All right, let's start with the signature analysis. I know a forensic examiner named Dr. Alan Pierce. He's expensive but thorough. He'll look at pen pressure, stroke continuity, ink flow. If it's forged, he'll find it. I signed the retainer that afternoon. I didn't know that Vivian had already prepared her next move. It came in the mail to Diane's office. A certified letter from Richard Croft addressed to counsel for Clara Lynn. Inside was a medical file. 16 pages. Clinic letterhead, dates, diagnosis, treatment notes. According to this file, I had been treated for generalized anxiety disorder with cognitive dissociation at a wellness clinic in Boston 2 years ago. I stared at the pages. My hands were steady, but something inside me was not. I've never been to a psychiatrist, I said. I've never been to Boston for any medical appointment. Ever. Diane read through the file slowly. The clinic is called Horizon Wellness Partners. The treating physician is listed as Dr. Elias Vance. The file includes session notes, a diagnosis summary, and a recommendation for ongoing monitoring. None of it is real. Diane set the pages down. If this file is legitimate, and I'm not saying it is, Vivian could petition the court to appoint a guardian ad litem. She could argue that you lack the mental capacity to contest the will. She could slow us down until you're too exhausted to fight. I felt the room tilt. Not because I was scared, because I understood. She's not just trying to take the money, I said. She's trying to take me. She wants to remove me entirely. Diane nodded. This isn't a defensive move. This is offensive. She prepared this in advance. The document listed a clinic in Boston, an address on Newbury Street, a doctor with credentials from a university I'd never heard of. I told Diane I wanted to check. She said to be careful. I drove to Boston the next morning, found the address, stood in front of a converted loft with a P.O. box sign in the window and a lease notice covered in fading tape. There was no clinic. There never had been. I called the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine from the parking lot of that empty building. I gave them the name Dr. Elias Vance, spelled it twice. The woman on the line typed for a while. Then she said, "We have no physician by that name licensed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts." "Are you certain?" I checked active, inactive, and revoked. No record. I sat in my car and wrote everything down. The address, the board's response, the date and time of my call. I took photographs of the building, the P.O. box, the lease notice that had been there long enough to curl at the edges. I logged the GPS coordinates. I time-stamped every photo. I saved the audio of the call. Then I drove back to Portland and sat in Diane's office. "The clinic doesn't exist," I said. "The doctor doesn't exist. The entire file is fabricated." Diane leaned forward. "Good. That tells us how far they're willing to go. But here's the problem. Proving the medical file is fake doesn't automatically prove the will is fake. Those are two separate legal questions. So we need more," I said. "We need someone from the inside," Diane said. "Someone who saw the will being prepared. Someone who can testify to how Croft operated." I looked out her window. The street below was quiet. A man sat on a bench near the crosswalk reading a newspaper. I barely noticed him. "Clara," Diane said, "I want to ask you something. When your father was alive, did he ever mention a specific place where he kept important documents?" I thought about it. The filing cabinet in the study. Vivian has that now. The safe deposit box at the bank. I'd need to check. And the wooden crate, the one with the compass rose. The wooden crate was sitting in my living room. I hadn't opened it yet. "Maybe," I said, "let me look." The black sedan showed up on a Tuesday. I noticed it on my way to work, sitting 2 cars behind me at the light on Commercial Street. Main plates, tinted windows. It followed me to the Historical Society parking lot, and then kept driving. Wednesday, same vehicle. This time it was parked across the street from my apartment when I left in the morning. It pulled out 30 seconds after I did. Thursday, I wrote down the plate number. It took Diane's office less than an hour to run it. Registered to Julian Vance. Vivian's son was following me. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up. Clara. Julian's voice was smooth, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this. "Listen, my mom just wants this to be settled quietly. There's no reason for lawyers and courts and all of that. It's expensive. It's stressful. Nobody wins." "What do you want, Julian?" "I want you to think about it. 15,000 is not nothing, and you have a good career. You don't need a workshop you're not living in. I said nothing. His voice dropped half a register. Courts take a long time. And your name, your mental health history. That would all become public record. Think about it. Is that really what you want? He was threatening me with a file that didn't exist about a condition I never had, created by a doctor who was never real at a clinic that was a PO box. Think about it, he said again. That's all I'm asking. I hung up, put the phone face down on the counter. Julian wasn't smart enough to build this plan, but he was loyal enough to execute it. That made him useful to his mother. And dangerous to me. Vivian worked fast. Within a week, she had told the neighborhood association that I was struggling with anxiety. She said it with concern in her voice. The way someone talks about a stray cat they feel sorry for but would never take in. People I had known for years started calling. Honey, Vivian mentioned you've been going through something. Do you need help? And we're praying for you, sweetheart. Vivian told us your father was very worried before he passed. She was poisoning the well, every conversation, every prayer circle, every casserole drop-off. She was building a version of me that didn't exist. A version that was unstable, unreliable, someone whose words couldn't be trusted. Then Eleanor Vance called. Eleanor was 62, retired probate attorney. She had handled my family's paperwork for 23 years. She watered my father's plants when he traveled. She brought him soup when my mother was in the hospital. I don't believe one word that woman says, Eleanor told me. Not one. But I don't have proof, Clara, just my gut. What have you seen? Eleanor paused. 4 days after the funeral. 4 days. She had men with a truck at the workshop hauling things out. Arthur's calibration tools, boxes of his logs. She was clearing him out like he was a tenant. I closed my eyes. And there was something else, Eleanor said. In the last month before your father passed, a man in a charcoal suit came to the workshop 3 times. Always when you weren't there. Always when your father was resting upstairs. Vivian met him at the door, a man in a charcoal suit. Richard Croft wore charcoal suits. I'd seen him once at the funeral standing near the back. Thank you, Eleanor, I said. You may have just given me the timeline I needed. That night, I sat on my living room floor and looked at the wooden crate. It had been sitting on the shelf by the window since the day I brought it home from the shed. I walked past it every morning, touched the lid sometimes, ran my fingers over the compass rose, but I hadn't opened it. Part of me was afraid of what I would feel. Part of me was afraid of what I wouldn't find. I lifted the lid. The smell hit me first. Cedar, linseed oil, old paper. And something faint underneath. Lavender. My mother kept dried lavender in her drawers. It had seeped into the lining of the crate over the years. On top was an envelope, cream-colored, my father's handwriting. Small, precise. The letters leaning slightly to the right the way they always did. For Clara, when the time is right, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter. He wrote it 3 weeks before he died. My sweet girl, if you are reading this, I am already gone. That's all right. Time moves forward. But I want you to know the workshop, the savings, the life your mother and I built together. It was always meant for you, I promised her. And I put it in writing. Don't let anyone rewrite what we built. Love always, Dad underneath the letter, folded into thirds and held together with a paperclip, was a document, a last will and testament, dated 6 years ago. Signed by Arthur David Lynn. Witnessed by Thomas Reed, longtime client, and Eleanor Vance, notary. Sealed, notarized. The will left the workshop and 80% of all financial assets to me. The remaining 20% was designated for the Maine Horological Preservation Guild. I held the 2 documents side by side. My father's letter, my father's will. The paper was slightly yellowed. The ink was steady. The signature was unmistakable. Loose, confident, the tail of the L sweeping low and curling back the way it always did. For the first time in 3 months, my hands weren't shaking. I called Diane. I found the original will, I said. It's in the wooden crate. Dr. Alan Pierce's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building near the courthouse. He had gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of patience that comes from spending 30 years looking at ink under a microscope. I gave him 3 documents, the original will from the wooden crate, the digital will from Croft's office, and the fake medical file. He worked for 8 days. When he called, his voice was measured but certain. The signature on the Croft will is a simulation, he said. There are pen lifts in the middle of strokes where a natural signature would flow continuously. The pressure is inconsistent. Heavier at the beginning of each letter, lighter at the end. That's the opposite of a relaxed hand. What does that mean in plain terms? Someone traced or carefully copied your father's signature. They did a competent job, but not a perfect one, he continued. The medical file is a separate issue, but equally problematic. The paper stock doesn't match standard medical printing. The font used in the header is a commercial typeface, not the institutional font typically used by Massachusetts healthcare facilities. And the physician's signature shows the same pen lift pattern as the will signature. The same person forged both. I said, that would be my conclusion. Yes. Diane reviewed the report that afternoon. She sat behind her desk and read it twice, then set it down. We have the original will. We have forensic evidence of forgery. We have the fake clinic and the non-existent doctor. And we have a leaner Vance who can testify that a man matching Croft's description visited the workshop repeatedly before Arthur's death. She looked at me. If we had someone from the inside, someone who actually saw the documents being prepared, this wouldn't even need to go to trial. I thought about the man on the bench outside her office, the one I kept seeing. If someone in your family has ever been pushed aside during an inheritance, told you didn't matter, told to accept less than you deserved, then you know what this feels like. It's not about the money, it's about being erased. If this story is hitting close to home, subscribe and stay with me because what happened next changed everything. I started noticing him 3 weeks into the investigation. The man on the bench. He sat near the crosswalk outside Diane's office building. The same bench, the same spot, worn coat, stubble that had grown past the point of deliberate, a canvas bag at his feet that looked like it held everything he owned. The first time I assumed he was waiting for a bus. The second time I noticed he was watching me, not staring, watching, the way someone watches a person they recognize but can't decide whether to approach. The third time I was leaving Diane's office after reviewing Pierce's report. I walked to my car. He stood up, took 2 steps toward me, opened his mouth. I got into my car and drove away. I told myself he was nobody. A stranger. Portland had its share of people who slept on benches and asked for spare change. I wasn't heartless. But I was also distracted by a woman trying to steal my father's estate and frame me as mentally incompetent. But something stayed with me. The way he stood when he saw me, not the way a panhandler stands. Shuffling, uncertain. He stood like someone who had made a decision. And I would learn 2 weeks later that he had been sitting on that bench every day because Diane's office was 6 blocks from the county recorder's office where he used to work. The office that fired him for refusing to do what Richard Croft asked. He knew my name before I knew his. He had been waiting to find the right moment. And the right moment came on the morning I was about to drive into a trap. The letter arrived on a Monday. Certified mail. Heavy cream paper with the Croft and Linwood letterhead embossed at the top. Dear Miss Lynn, you are formally invited to attend a meeting regarding the estate of Arthur David Lynn to be held at the offices of Croft and Linwood, 412 Congress Street, Suite 310, Portland, Maine. Friday, October 17th, 2 p.m. All interested parties are expected to attend. The last will and testament of Arthur D. Lynn will be confirmed, and the distribution process will commence. Diane read it over the phone. This is a power play. If they confirm the Croft will at this meeting and you don't formally object, it accelerates the probate timeline against us. So we object. We do more than object, Diane said. We show up with everything. I spent the next 5 days organizing. The original will in a protective sleeve. Pierce's forensic report in a bound folder. Aliner's notarized written testimony confirming the timeline. The charcoal-suited man. The 4-day cleanout. The headstone that Vivian didn't wait for. Diane prepped her arguments. She contacted the Maine Board of Licensure in Medicine to confirm Dr. Elias Vance's status. She cross-referenced the digital notarization logs. She mapped the IP addresses. Everything we had was strong, but it was all external. If we had someone who was inside that office, well, someone who watched Croft prepare the documents, it would be over. Croft would fold to protect himself. I didn't have that person. Not yet. 5 days until the meeting. 4, 3... Then Marcus Thorne stopped waiting on that bench and walked across a parking lot. It was Tuesday evening, 3 days before the meeting. I was leaving the Historical Society, late as usual, because archival restoration waits for no one, and walking to my car in the back lot. He was standing next to it, not leaning, standing. Hands visible, arms at his sides, like he wanted me to see that he wasn't a threat. Miss Lynn, I stopped 10 feet away. My keys were between my fingers the way every woman in America learns to hold them after dark. My name is Marcus Thorne. I don't want anything from you, but you need to hear what I know. He was thinner than I expected. His coat had a tear along the shoulder seam. His shoes were worn at the heel, but his eyes were clear. Alert. The kind of eyes that belong to someone who has been paying attention. How do you know my name? I asked. Because I used to work at the county recorder's office. 7 years. I was a notary clerk and archival processor. Your name was on every document Richard Croft submitted for Arthur Lynn's estate. I saw him backdate the digital notarization affidavit. I saw him request a timestamp override. I refused. The following week, I was terminated for procedural noncompliance. My breath caught. I saw him create the new will, Marcus said. I saw him scan your father's signature from a 2019 tax return and paste it into a new document. I saw him produce medical records for a clinic that doesn't exist, for a doctor that doesn't exist, diagnosing you with a condition you don't have. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus's jaw tightened. Because I was supposed to stamp those documents. I refused. I still remember the exact sequence. He printed the medical file on his personal laser printer because the office machine was down. He used a commercial font for the header because the official clinic template didn't load. He ran the will through a digital signature pad, but he didn't let your father touch it. He used a stylus. I watched him trace it. I logged the override request in the county system. When I refused to validate it, they locked my account. 2 weeks later, I was let go. Did you go to the police? He looked at me. I was a clerk with no physical evidence. They took my terminal access when I left. My word against a licensed attorney with 30 years of practice. And 3 months after I lost the job, I lost my apartment. After that, I was a guy sleeping on benches, accusing a respected lawyer of fraud. He took a slow breath. Nobody listens to people who sleep on benches. I listened. I brought Marcus to Diane's office the next morning, Wednesday, 2 days before the meeting. Diane was cautious. She closed her office door and sat down across from him with her arms folded. Mr. Thorne, I appreciate you coming forward, but I have to be direct. The opposing side will argue that you're a disgruntled former employee with no physical evidence, a man experiencing housing instability, accusing a licensed attorney of forgery. How do you respond to that? Marcus didn't flinch. I can describe the software Croft used to prepare the documents. Legal Draft Pro version 8.2. I can tell you the file naming convention he used. Client last name _ document type _ date. Lynn will _ 2024. I can tell you the exact dates Vivian came to the office. March 7th, March 21st, and April 2nd. I logged every client visit in the intake system. I can tell you the exact override code Croft used to bypass the timestamp. I can tell you the IP address of his personal printer. I remember because I used to maintain the county network. Diane unfolded her arms. Combined with Pierce's forensic report, the original will, the fake clinic investigation, and Aliner's testimony, Diane said slowly. This is enough. Enough for what? Marcus asked. Enough that Croft will fold. He's a criminal, but he's not stupid. When he sees an insider witness plus forensic evidence plus the original document, he will protect himself before he protects Vivian. She pulled out a legal pad. Here's what we do. We go to Friday's meeting, and we bring everything. Friday morning, October 17th. I woke at 5:30, showered, put on the navy blue dress I had bought 3 days earlier. Not because I wanted to look powerful, but because I wanted to look like someone who had slept and eaten and wasn't falling apart, even if I had barely slept and couldn't eat. I gathered the documents, the original will in its protective sleeve, Pierce's report, Aliner's testimony, Diane's legal brief, everything in a leather satchel that I placed on the passenger seat, and in the back seat the wooden crate. I walked to my car in the apartment parking lot at 8:45. The meeting was at 2. I wanted to arrive early. I pressed the unlock button. The headlights flashed, and Marcus sprinted across the street. Ma'am. He was breathing hard, hands on his knees. Don't start that car. Not yet. Marcus, what are you? Julian was here this morning. 6:15. I saw him from across the street. He sat in a silver car and watched your building for 20 minutes. My stomach dropped. That's not all, Marcus said. I called a contact. I still have a receptionist at Croft's office. She told me they have a doctor coming to the meeting today, a psychiatrist. Dr. Helen Marsh. Vivian arranged it. I stared at him. They're planning to evaluate you right there in the room. If you walk in without knowing, they will blindside you. Vivian will say you're unstable. Marsh will ask you questions designed to support the fake medical file, and by the time you realize what's happening, it will already be in the record. I leaned against my car. The wooden crate sat behind me through the window. So I shouldn't go. Marcus straightened up. No, you should go, but you should go ready, and I should be there. I called Diane. Change of plans. Marcus is coming with us. I started the car. Marcus walked around to the passenger side. I handed him a clean shirt from the back seat, white, still in the package. He looked at it, then at me. Thank you, he said. Thank me after, I said, and I pulled out of the lot. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the person you expect. Sometimes it's someone the rest of the world stopped seeing a long time ago. If someone in your life has ever stood up for you when they had nothing to gain, you know how that feels. Stay with me, we're almost at the meeting and Vivian has no idea what's coming. Croft and Linwood occupied the third floor of a glass and brick building on East Market Street. The elevator was slow. The hallway smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. Diane and I arrived at 1:50, 10 minutes early. Marcus waited in the lobby downstairs. He would come up when Diane sent the signal. The conference room had a long dark table, 8 leather chairs, a window that looked out onto the parking lot. On the table, Richard Croft had arranged a stack of documents, 3 pens, and a carafe of water with glasses for everyone. Like this was a closing on a house, like this was routine. I smelled the jasmine before I saw her. Vivian sat at the far end of the table. White blouse, red lipstick, her hair freshly done. She looked like she was posing for a magazine cover about successful widows. On her wrist, my father's master chronometer still looped through that silver chain. Julian sat to her right. New suit again, arms crossed. He glanced at me when I walked in and then looked at the wall. Richard Croft sat at the head of the table. Charcoal suit, silver pen, reading glasses perched on his nose. He nodded at me the way you nod at someone you expect to lose. And in the corner, in a chair slightly set back from the table, sat a woman I had never seen. Mid-50s, clipboard on her lap, pen in her hand. She wore a name badge that read Dr. Helen Marsh, licensed clinical psychologist. Just like Marcus said, Vivian smiled. Clara, sit down. Let's get this resolved quickly. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed my leather satchel on the table. It was heavier than usual. Croft opened a folder and began reading. His voice was flat, professional. The voice of a man who had read hundreds of wills and expected this one to go exactly the same way. The last will and testament of Arthur David Lynn, dated January 15, 2024. Article 1. I, Arthur David Lynn, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils. He read the distribution. The workshop to Vivian Vance Lynn. All savings and investment accounts to Vivian Vance Lynn. The life insurance payout to Vivian Vance Lynn. To his daughter Clara Ruth Lynn, a specific bequest of $15,000. 97% to Vivian. 3% to me. Croft set the document down. Are there any questions? Vivian didn't wait. Arthur was very clear about this. He wanted me taken care of. He told me many times. Clara has her career. She'll be fine. She turned to me with manufactured sympathy. I know this is hard, sweetheart. Then Dr. Marsh leaned forward, clipboard ready, pen uncapped. Before we proceed, Marsh said, I've been asked to be present today because of some concerns regarding Miss Lynn's current psychological state. Mrs. Lynn has shared medical documentation suggesting. My voice was quiet. Level, I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. Who invited you to this meeting? She paused, looked at Vivian, looked at Croft. Mrs. Lynn contacted me. Thank you, I said. I appreciate your concern, but before anyone evaluates anyone, I have a few documents I'd like to share. I reached into my satchel and I pulled out the wooden crate. I set it on the table. The room went quiet. I opened the lid of the wooden crate. The smell of cedar and lavender filled the conference room. Vivian stiffened. She recognized the crate. She was the one who threw it in the shed with the sawdust and the broken shelves. I removed the will, placed it on the table. This is the last will and testament of Arthur David Lynn, dated June 14, 2018. 6 years before the document Mr. Croft just read. Signed by my father, witnessed by Thomas Reed, his longtime client, and Alina Vance, his neighbor and former notary for 23 years. Sealed, notarized, filed with the Cumberland County Clerk's office. I pushed the document across the table toward Croft. This will leaves the workshop and 80% of all financial assets to me. The remaining 20% funds a preservation guild for antique timepieces. My father wrote this when he was 53 years old, in good health and under no one's influence. Diane placed a hand on the table. For the record, this is the only will signed by Arthur Lynn, in the presence of independent witnesses with an established relationship to the testator. Vivian's smile hadn't moved, but the color behind it had. She looked at Croft. Croft looked at the will. He picked it up carefully, read the date, read the signatures, set it down. This document is 6 years old, Vivian said. Her voice was still controlled, barely. Arthur changed his mind. People do that. They do, I said, but they usually sign the new document themselves. Croft's hand moved toward his pen. Stopped. He said nothing. Julian shifted in his chair. He was looking at the will like he had never seen one before. Maybe he hadn't. Dr. Marsh sat motionless with her clipboard untouched. I wasn't done. Diane opened her briefcase and placed a bound document on the table. This is the forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Alan Pierce, a certified document examiner with 32 years of experience and over 300 court-accepted reports. She opened to the summary page. Dr. Pierce's conclusion. The signature on the Croft will is a simulation. He identified pen lift patterns inconsistent with natural handwriting, pressure deviations at the beginning and end of letter strokes, and spacing anomalies that indicate the signature was carefully copied rather than freely written. She let that sit for 3 seconds. In plain language, the signature on the will Mr. Croft just read to us was forged. Croft cleared his throat. One expert's opinion doesn't. I also have this, Diane said. She placed a second folder on the table. An investigation into the medical records submitted to my office by Mr. Croft. The records claim my client was treated at Horizon Wellness Partners on Newbury Street in Boston. I visited that address. It's a vacant loft. It's been vacant for over 2 years. She placed photographs on the table. The P.O. box, the lease notice, the fading tape, the physician listed on the records. Dr. Elias Vance is not licensed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He does not appear in any medical licensing database in any state. Vivian's hand went to her throat. There must be some confusion. Dr. Marsh set her clipboard on the table. She looked at Vivian, then at Croft, and then at the photographs. She stood up, picked up her bag. I wasn't informed about any of this, she said to no one in particular. She walked out of the conference room without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. The psychiatrist Vivian brought to declare me incompetent had just left the room, and she didn't say goodbye. Diane looked at me. I nodded. She pulled out her phone and sent one text message. 30 seconds later, the conference room door opened. Marcus Thorne walked in. He wore the white shirt I had given him that morning. It was slightly too large in the shoulders. His hair was combed, his face was shaved. He was still too thin, and his hands still carried the roughness of someone who had spent months sleeping on concrete. But he stood straight, and his eyes were steady. Vivian looked at him. The blood drained from her face the way water drains from a cracked glass, slowly at first, then all at once. She knew him. Croft knew him, too. He leaned back in his chair as if the table had suddenly become electrified. Who is this? Julian asked. He was the only one in the room who didn't know. My name is Marcus Thorne, Marcus said. His voice was calm, controlled, not angry, just clear. I worked as a notary clerk and archival processor at the Cumberland County Recorder's office for 7 years. I was present when you submitted the override request for the digital notarization of Arthur Lynn's estate documents. I was present when you requested the timestamp bypass. I refused to validate the files. You terminated my access the following week. The room was completely silent. Marcus looked at Vivian. You came to the office 3 times. March 7th, March 21st, April 2nd. Mr. Lynn never accompanied you, not once. I looked at Vivian and I said it. You told me I was never his focus, that he chose you. My voice didn't waver, but my father didn't choose you. You chose for him. You walked into a law office with his tax returns and his trust, and you built a version of his wishes that he never wrote, never signed, and never knew about. Vivian's hands were shaking. The master chronometer slipped from her wrist and landed on the conference table with a soft metallic tap. She didn't pick it up. I loved Arthur, she whispered. I just wanted. She didn't finish the sentence. Her body folded forward in the chair. She pressed both hands against the table edge. Her shoulders heaved. She cried, not the careful timed tears she produced at the funeral, real ones, the kind that come when every lie runs out of room. Julian sat frozen in his chair. His eyes were wide. He was looking at his mother the way you look at someone you thought you knew. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I didn't say another word. I sat in my chair, hands folded, watching a woman who had tried to steal my father's legacy and my sanity fall apart under the weight of the truth. The truth doesn't need volume. Croft sat very still for a long time. 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. He stared at the original will, then at Pierce's report, then at Marcus, then he said, I need to speak with my attorney. You should, Diane replied. Because my office will be filing a formal complaint with the Maine Board of Licensure in Law on Monday, and will be forwarding the forensic evidence and Mr. Thorne's testimony to the Cumberland County District Attorney for review. Croft didn't respond. He placed his pen on the table very carefully, as if the act of setting it down required his full concentration. Vivian raised her head. Mascara smeared. Her voice was raw. Your father wouldn't have wanted this, Clara. He wouldn't have wanted his family torn apart. My father wanted the truth, I said. He wrote it down 6 years ago and put it in a crate he built with his own hands. That's what he wanted. Vivian had nothing left, and then Julian spoke. It was the first time he had said anything since the meeting began. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. She told me he wanted it this way. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his mother. You told me he wanted this. Vivian didn't answer. She stared at the table. Julian closed his eyes, pressed his lips together, stood up. I need to go, he said, and he walked out of the room. I watched him leave. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindication. I felt something closer to exhaustion. The kind that comes after you've been holding your breath for months and someone finally says you can stop. Diane gathered the documents, the wooden crate, the forensic report, the photographs. We're done here, she said. And we were. 2 weeks later, the Cumberland County Probate Court confirmed my father's original will. The one from the wooden crate. The one witnessed by Thomas Reed and Eleanor Vance. The one that left the workshop and 80% of everything to me. The Croft will was thrown out. Richard Croft was placed under investigation by the Maine Board of Licensure in law within 10 days of our filing. His license to practice law was suspended pending review. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into forgery and fraud. Under Maine law, forgery of a legal document carries up to 10 years in prison. The fake medical records added a second set of charges. Vivian wasn't arrested, not immediately, but she lost all claims to the estate. The court ordered her to vacate my father's workshop within 30 days. She packed her things and moved to her sister's house in Bangor. I heard she didn't fight it. The medical file she fabricated was referred to the Attorney General's office for potential charges of criminal fraud and impersonation of a medical professional. As of the last update from Diane, the investigation was ongoing. Eleanor testified in the probate proceedings. She confirmed the timeline, the man in the charcoal suit visiting the workshop, the 4-day cleanout after the funeral, the speed with which Vivian had moved to erase Arthur from his own workspace. She didn't even wait for the headstone, Eleanor told the court. The preservation fund was established 6 weeks after the will was confirmed. The Arthur Lynn Horological Preservation Fund, $2,000 a year for a student apprenticing under a master clockmaker. My father would have liked that. He always said craftsmanship was the one thing nobody could take from you. I kept the workshop. Dad's tools are still on the pegboard. I restored my mother's drafting table, the one with the crack down the edge. It sits in the corner now next to the wooden crate. Marcus Thorne started working at a law firm in Augusta 3 weeks after the meeting. Diane made the introduction, not as charity, as a professional recommendation. He has 7 years of archival and notary experience, she told the hiring partner. He has integrity, and he has a story that proves it. Marcus got the job. Entry-level position, modest salary. But it came with a desk, a login, and the kind of dignity that a bench on a crosswalk could never provide. I saw him a month later. He came to the workshop to drop off a document Diane had asked him to deliver. He stood on the porch and looked at the door like he wasn't sure he belonged there. Come in, I said. I made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Vivian had told 14 people I was never my father's focus. Marcus held his mug with both hands the way he always did. How are you doing? I asked. I have an apartment, he said. A studio. It's small, but it's mine. I nodded. Thank you, he said, for listening that night. You didn't have to. You didn't have to sit on that bench for 3 weeks, I said. He almost smiled. I wasn't sure you'd believe me. I almost didn't. He looked around the kitchen, the cabinets my father built, the window my mother used to open every morning to let the breeze in. I picked up the master chronometer from the counter. It had been sitting there since I brought it home from the conference room. Cleaned it, wound it, it still kept time. I held it for a moment, the weight of it, the warmth. Then I clipped it to my belt loop, the way my father used to. The wooden crate sat on the shelf in the living room exactly where it belonged. The truth doesn't need volume. It doesn't need drama. It just needs one person willing to carry it even when no one is watching. That's my story. A wooden crate, a forged signature, and one man who refused to stay quiet. If this reminded you to check your own family's legal documents, do it today. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.